The sound of that thick manila folder hitting the mahogany dining table echoed like a gunshot in the sudden silence of the room. A sound I will never, ever forget as long as I live. It was a heavy, dull thud that seemed to suck all the air out of the dining room, instantly replacing the polite clinking of silverware and the meaningless chatter about the weather with a suffocating tension that made my skin crawl. I was sitting there, miserable as usual, my knees throbbing with that familiar, deep-seated ache that felt like someone was grinding broken glass into my joints, a pain I had been told for 8 long years was all in my head. I was trying to hide it, trying to be the good daughter, and not rue in another family gathering with my drama, just pushing the food around my plate, and waiting for the inevitable lecture from my mother about my posture or my sullen attitude. But then, my grandpa, my dad's father, a man who usually just ate his roast beef in quiet contemplation, stood up at the head of the table. He didn't just stand up. He rose with a kind of furious, controlled energy that I had never seen in him before. Beside him stood a man none of us knew, a stern-faced guy in a cheap suit who had been introduced briefly as a colleague of Grandpa's, but who had sat silently through the soup course like a gargoyle. And then came the folder. The thud, everyone froze. My fork hovered halfway to my mouth. My dad stopped mid-chew, a piece of broccoli hanging precariously from his lip. But it was my mother's reaction that chilled me to the bone. Before Grandpa had even spoken a word, before the contents of that folder were revealed to the light of day, her hands, resting on the tablecloth, started to tremble violently. It wasn't a subtle shake. It was a spasm of pure, unfiltered terror. Her face went from its usual composed, slightly disapproving mask to a sheet white canvas of panic. I looked from her shaking hands to the grim set of Grandpa's jaw, and suddenly the agonizing, confusing fog of the last 8 years of my life began to clear, replaced by a horrifying realization that something massive, something monstrous, was about to be exposed. Have you ever had a moment where you realized the people who were supposed to protect you were actually the ones holding the knife? Because sitting at that table, looking at my mother's terrifying guilt before an accusation had even been leveled, I knew my world was about to shatter. To understand why that moment at the dinner table was so cataclysmic, you have to understand the 8 years of absolute hell that led up to it. It started when I was 14. Before that, I was a normal, active kid. I played soccer, I was in the drama club, I had a social life. Then, slowly at first, the fatigue started setting in. It wasn't just being tired after a long day at school. It was a bone, deep exhaustion that made getting out of bed feel like climbing Everest. Then came the joint pain. It started in my wrists and knees, a dull ache that graduated to sharp, stabbing pains that could leave me breathless. Then the fevers, random spikes in temperature that left me shivering and sweaty, followed by bizarre rashes that would appear on my arms and chest and vanish a day later. I went from being the star forward on my soccer team to barely being able to walk up the stairs to my bedroom. Naturally, the first thing we did was go to our family doctor, Dr. Albright. He was a nice enough man, nearing retirement, and he ran the standard blood panels. Everything came back within normal range, he shrugged, suggested it might be growing pains, or perhaps stress related to starting high school. He told me to take some ibuprofen and get more sleep, but it didn't get better, it got worse. The pain became a constant companion, a screaming noise in the background of my life that I couldn't turn down. I started missing school days here and there, then whole weeks. My grades slipped. My friends stopped calling because I could never go out. I was always too sick or too tired. I became isolated, trapped in a body that felt like it was actively attacking itself. We went back to Dr. Albright a few more times, but his patience wore thin quickly. Because the basic tests showed nothing remarkable, he decided the problem wasn't physical. And that's when my parents' narrative took hold. It started subtly. My mom would sigh loudly when I said I couldn't do the dishes because my hands were cramping up. "Oh, honestly, my name, it's just a few plates. Don't be so dramatic." My dad would roll his eyes when I limped coming down the stairs. "You're walking fine when your friends are here," he'd say, which wasn't true at all, but it fit the story they were building. They started telling relatives that I was going through a difficult phase, that I was seeking attention, that I was lazy. By the time I was 16, the gaslighting was full-blown. If I complained about pain, I was accused of trying to get out of chores or homework. If I cried because I was frustrated and hurting, they called me emotionally unstable. They refused to take me to specialists. I begged to see a rheumatologist, an immunologist, anyone outside of our small town GP. My mother's response was always about money. "Do you know how much those specialists cost? My name. We don't have that kind of money just to have someone tell you the same thing Dr. Albright did, that there's nothing wrong with you." They constantly talked about how tight finances were. We couldn't afford vacations, we couldn't afford new cars, and we certainly couldn't afford fancy doctors for my imaginary illnesses. I started to internalize their words. When you are told every single day by the people who are supposed to love you most that your reality is false, you start to believe them. I began to think I was crazy. Maybe I was just dramatic. Maybe everyone felt this much pain and just handled it better than I did. I felt tremendous guilt for being such a burden on them, for causing them so much stress with my made-up problems. I learned to mask the pain. I stopped complaining. I gritted my teeth and forced myself to do things even when I felt like I was going to pass out, just to avoid their scorn. I became an expert at hiding my limps, at suppressing the winces when a flare-up hit. I was living a double life, the outward, facing facade of a slightly moody teenager, and the internal reality of a chronically ill person drowning in agony and self-doubt. I missed my prom because I couldn't stand for more than 10 minutes. I almost didn't walk at my high school graduation because my hips were locked up so badly that morning. Through it all, my parents played the role of the long-suffering martyrs dealing with a difficult child. The only person who never quite bought their story was Grandpa, my dad's dad. He was an old-school guy, a retired engineer who believed in facts and data. He and Grandma had lived in Florida for most of my teenage years, so I only saw them a couple of times a year. But Grandma passed away when I was 20, and Grandpa moved back north to be closer to family, buying a small condo about 20 minutes from our house. By this point, I was 22, living at home and taking online community college courses because I couldn't manage a physical campus, working a part-time data entry job from my bedroom. I was a shadow of a person. When Grandpa moved back, he started coming over for dinner every Sunday, and he watched me. He didn't say much at first, just observed with those sharp, analytical blue eyes. He noticed things my parents chose to ignore. He saw how I gripped the table edge when I stood up. He saw the sheen of sweat on my forehead when a wave of pain hit. He noticed how little I ate because my stomach was always in knots. One Sunday, about 6 months after he moved back, my mom was mid-lecture about how I needed to get out more and stop wallowing in my room. I was staring at my plate, taking it as usual. Grandpa suddenly cut her off. "Linda," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "look at the girl, she's gray. Her knuckles are swollen twice their normal size. That's not wallowing. Something is physically wrong." My mother sputtered, immediately defensive. "Oh, Dad, don't fall for it. She's just having a bad day because I asked her to empty the dishwasher," Dr. Albright said. Grandpa slammed his hand on the table. "Damn Dr. Albright, the man is a fool. Have you taken her to a specialist, a rheumatologist?" My dad jumped in then. "Dad, we've been over this. We can't afford thousands of dollars in copays just to chase shadows. We're barely making ends meet as it is. The business has been slow, the house needs repairs." They went into their usual rehearsed routine about poverty. Grandpa just stared at them, his expression unreadable. He didn't push it further that night, but the dynamic shifted. He started picking me up sometimes during the week, taking me for short drives or just sitting with me in the park. He asked me questions about the pain, where it was, what triggered it, how long it lasted. He didn't judge, he just gathered data. He told me, "Kid, pain is your body's check engine light. You don't ignore it just because the mechanic can't find the problem right away." His validation was like oxygen to a drowning person. For the first time in 8 years, someone believed me. Little did I know Grandpa wasn't just observing. He was acting. About a month before the infamous dinner, he had come over while my parents were out. He asked to see my bank statements from the little account I had for my part-time job, and then he asked some very specific questions about my grandmother's will. I didn't know much. I knew Grandma had left some money, but my parents always told me it was tied up in investments or used for funeral costs. Grandpa listened, his face darkening with every vague answer I gave him based on what my parents had told me. He patted my hand, his skin rough like parchment paper. "All right, kid, don't you worry about it. I'm going to look into a few things." I had no idea what that meant. I thought maybe he was going to try and help me pay for a doctor myself. I never suspected the depth of what he was actually doing. I never suspected that he was meticulously pulling on a loose thread that would unravel our entire family. Which brings us back to that night. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration of my dad's birthday. My parents had gone all out: roast beef, expensive wine, a fancy cake from the bakery in the city. It seemed odd, given how constantly they complained about being broke, but I learned long ago not to question their spending habits. Grandpa arrived with Mr. Henderson, introduced vaguely as a former colleague from his engineering days who was in town. Mr. Henderson was quiet, observant, and frankly intimidating. He didn't look like an engineer, he looked like an ex-cop. The dinner was tense from the start. My parents were acting overly cheerful, almost manic, pouring wine with a heavy hand. Grandpa was stony silent. I was just trying to survive the pain in my hips, which was at a solid 7 out of 10 that night. We got through the main course, and the plates were being cleared. That's when Grandpa stood up. That's when the room went silent. That's when Mr. Henderson handed Grandpa the thick manila folder. That's when the thud echoed, and my mother's hands began their violent trembling. So here I am, sitting at that table, 8 years of pain and gaslighting weighing on my shoulders, looking at my mother's terrified face and Grandpa's righteous fury. I'm about to find out the truth, and I'm terrified of what it is. Before I tell you what was in that folder, I need you to pause for a second. I need you to put yourself in my shoes. Imagine being told your reality is fake for your entire adolescence and young adulthood. Imagine trusting the people who raised you, even when they were hurting you. If you were me, sitting there right before the explosion, what would you be thinking? Would you feel vindicated, scared, sad? Let me know in the comments what you think you would have felt in that split second before the world changed. Grandpa placed one hand flat on the folder, looking directly at my father, then my mother. His voice was low, devoid of any warmth. It was the voice of a judge delivering a sentence. For years, he began, I have watched my granddaughter wither away. I have watched her in pain, and for years I have listened to the two of you dismissal her, call her a liar, and claim poverty as the reason you couldn't get her the help she needed. My dad started to stand up, his face turning red. Now wait just a minute, Dad, you don't know what it's been like. Sit down, Robert. Grandpa roared, a sound so powerful it made the glasses on the table rattle. My dad sat, stunned. Grandpa turned to the man beside him. This is Mr. Henderson. Forget about the sitting on the ground and staring into the refrigerator. I hired him a month ago because things weren't adding up. Specifically, your mother's estate wasn't adding up. My mother let out a small, strangled squeak. Grandpa opened the folder. It was crammed with papers, bank statements, legal documents, copies of checks. He pulled out a document on blue paper. This, Grandpa said, holding it up, is a copy of my late wife's, your mother's, final will and testament. The real one, not the doctored version you showed me, Robert. He threw it on the table. When your mother died 8 years ago, she knew my name was starting to get sick. She was worried sick about her. So, she set up a dedicated medical trust fund specifically for my name S-Care. $250,000. It was meant to cover specialists' treatments, travel to the best hospitals, anything she needed to get well. The room spun. $250,000 for me, for doctors, no. I whispered, the word barely escaping my lips. Grandpa wasn't done. He pulled out a stack of bank statements, highlighted in angry yellow marker. Mr. Henderson tracked the trust, Robert and Linda, as the executors. You had control. The trust specified it was only for medical expenses. He slammed the statements down on top of the will. So perhaps you can explain to me why, over the last 7 years, this trust has been drained to almost zero, with not a single dime going to a doctor, Mr. Henderson stepped forward, his voice dry and clinical as he read from his own notes. June 14, 2017. Withdrawal of $35,000 from the trust. Same day, a wire transfer of $35,000 was made to expand Robert's business inventory. September 2018. Withdrawal of $12,000. 2 days later, Linda purchased a first-class ticket to Europe and booked a 10-day luxury cruise. August 2020. Withdrawal of $45,000, matched by a contractor's invoice for the kitchen renovation you had done that year. He went on and on. The new car my dad got a great deal on. The vacation home they rented for a month with their friends, telling me they were just house-sitting. The designer clothes my mom hid in the back of her closet. Every single time they told me we had no money. Every time they told me I was dramatic and that doctors were too expensive. They were siphoning off the money my grandmother meant for my salvation. Fund their lifestyle. My mother burst into tears. Ugly, loud, hysterical tears. We meant to pay it back, she wailed. The business was in trouble, we just borrowed it. We didn't think she was that sick. My dad just sat there, gray-faced, staring at the tablecloth. The facade of the loving, struggling parents had completely crumbled, revealing 2 selfish, greedy monsters who had sacrificed their daughter's health for a new kitchen and a cruise. I stood up. The pain in my joints was screaming, but the rage in my heart was louder. I looked at them, really looked at them, for the first time. I didn't see parents, I saw thieves, I saw abusers. You let me suffer, I said, my voice shaking with a fury I didn't know I possessed. For 8 years, you watched me cry myself to sleep. You watched me miss my life. You made me think I was crazy. Also, you could have stuff. You stole Grandma's love for me and turned it into a kitchen island. I turned to Grandpa, get me out of here. Grandpa nodded. Go pack a bag, kid, you're coming with me. He turned back to my parents, his voice like ice. Mr. Henderson has already forwarded this file to the district attorney. You're facing charges for embezzlement, fraud, and elder abuse regarding the violation of the trust, and I will personally spend every last dime I have on lawyers to make sure you pay for what you did to this girl. I went upstairs, threw some clothes in a duffel bag, and walked out of that house without looking back. I left the dinner, the expensive wine, the lies, and the parents I thought I knew behind forever. The aftermath has been a whirlwind. I moved into Grandpa's condo. Within 2 weeks, using what little was left of the trust and Grandpa's savings, I saw a top-tier rheumatologist in the city. It took 3 visits and a lot of tests, but I finally got answers. I have seronegative rheumatoid arthritis and fibromyalgia. It's severe, having gone untreated for nearly a decade, and has caused some permanent joint damage. But it's manageable. I started a biologic medication and physical therapy. It's not a miracle cure. I still have pain every day. But it's a 3 out of 10 now, not an 8. I have energy. I can think clearly. The brain fog is lifting. My parents were arrested a week after the dinner. The evidence was overwhelming. They are currently out on bail, awaiting trial. They have tried to contact me through lawyers, through relatives, sending letters begging for forgiveness, claiming they lost their way, and that they love me. I burned the letters unopened. I have a restraining order against both of them. The rest of the family is split. Some aunts and uncles think Grandpa went too far getting the police involved, that family business should stay in the family. Others are horrified and have cut my parents off completely. I don't care what any of them think. Grandpa is my hero. He saved my life, not just physically, by getting me the medical care I needed, but mentally. He pulled me out of the gaslit reality I was drowning in and showed me the truth. I'm slowly rebuilding my life. I'm back in school, looking into transferring to a university now that I can actually walk around a campus. I'm making friends. I'm learning who I am without the constant shroud of agony and self-doubt. I learned the hard way that family isn't about blood. Blood just means you're related. Family are the people who show up for you, who believe you, who protect you when you can't protect yourself. Sometimes the people who share your DNA are the ones who will hurt you the most. If you're out there and you're hurting, and people are telling you it's in your head, don't stop fighting. Listen to your body, find your grandpa, find your advocate, even if it's just yourself. Trust your own reality. Thanks for listening to my story. It was hard to relive, but I needed to get it out there. If you've ever been gaslit by people you trusted, or if you're cheering for Grandpa and me, please hit that like button so more people can see this. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel because believe me, the trial is coming up and there will be updates. And please drop a comment below. Let me know your final thoughts on this whole mess. I read them all and they help more than you know. I'll see you all in the next story.